Sergey Viktorovich, you are the kind of person our citizens definitely do not need an introduction to. But here I know how to surprise, with your Sinhalese language. Here, say hello in Sinhalese. We have found ourselves for the second time in the top 5. In the federal top 5 of United Russia's pre-election list. What does this mean for you? Obviously, it is collective work. Obviously, someone, probably one person is responsible. You probably know exactly who. For you, is this a matter of trust? An assessment?
Well, it is definitely a matter of trust. There is probably no need to even discuss it at length here. But the main thing for me is the leadership's decision to recommend me for this top 5, which received approval at the United Russia Congress. I have good relations with the leaders of all parliamentary parties, without exception, having relations with all Duma factions and parties represented in the Duma. Of course, we are interested in them helping to make decisions, to approve laws that consolidate our foreign policy course so that it is as effective as possible and relies on broad support. My presence in the top 5 by decision of the leadership also reflects the circumstances associated with a very difficult period that the country is currently going through, and a period that, to a decisive extent, of course, depends on how we conduct the special military operation against those who unleashed a war against Russia, keeping in mind both our fighters on the front lines and the rear in every sense. On the other hand, of course, foreign policy and diplomacy are also called upon to play a very large supporting role, considering how our Western interlocutors, by and large, are trying to deceive us. They promise one thing, do another, but we are already used to this. We should have gotten used to it. But every time, because of the state of the Russian soul, we want to believe in the best. But patience eventually snaps. And it is not for nothing that the President, shortly after the start of the special military operation, commenting on our relations with the West and Europe at one of the events, summed it up. The way it was before February 2022 will never be again.
The West has simply gone mad, and no one is going to adhere to any agreements, any old agreements that worked for decades. And of course, everything is being dismantled, and we know and feel this. In this situation, do we have an alternative to offer the world?
First of all, we must first defend our legitimate interests. In order to offer something to the world, we must win. The world is watching with great attention, some with bated breath, to see how this war, forced upon us by the West, will end, in response to which the President announced the start of the special military operation. It is not that we are surrounded by unprincipled people on this planet, but that is life. Everyone wants to understand what the strength is, brother, and where the strength is, brother, to paraphrase Sergey Lavrov. But you are absolutely right when you say that now they don't even try to hide, mask, or camouflage anything. They openly announced first the strategic defeat that must be inflicted on Russia, then, observing the situation on the line of combat contact, essentially on the front, they backed away from this rhetoric. Now, when Zelensky, constantly retreating in the Donbass and other areas of the front, when out of desperation he switched to outright terrorist activities, and they see how many of his long-range weapons reach their targets, they have begun to PR this phase of what is happening as a turning point, as proof that it is still possible to defeat Russia with such Ukrainian character. The Russia which, the aggressor, wanted to conquer all of Europe after Ukraine. Therefore, the slogan of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia has reappeared, the slogan of the decolonization of Russia has appeared, which frankly implies the dismemberment of our country once again. The revival of those hopes that the West also harbored during the stage of the disappearance of the Soviet Union, watching as separatist movements appeared in the Far East and the Urals, not to mention the Caucasus, cherishing the hope that everything would fall apart now and could be picked up piece by piece. And already there, I think, they were even calculating who should get what.
We were one step away from that, right? Yes, we had Euro francs circulating.
Well, of course, the so-called Euro Republic. Everything was on the brink, and the fact that Valery Nikolaevich Yeltsin found, I will say frankly, the courage within himself to hand over power ahead of schedule, and the fact that he handed power to the one person who at that moment was able to save Russia. Well, you see, such a historical turn, which probably means that, after all, Russia is marked by God, and when things get really tough, we are helped from above. But now, when they are again talking about a strategic defeat, when they actively support our relocants who organize all sorts of anti-Russian societies in Europe, collecting funds to continue some kind of underground struggle for the splintering of the Russian Federation, they absolutely do not hide this anymore. Our central channels show everything that the West is plotting. And probably it is important for everyone to see this in order to understand that the situation is no joke. The President does not hide this. The entire civilized world, which calls itself that, has taken up arms against us.
Until 2007, until the Munich speech, they loved us with open arms. Now at least everything is more honest.
They thought we were in their pocket, and President Putin, when he came to power, was absolutely open to an equal strategic partnership with the West. The fact that now our former allies, namely the Anglo-Saxons with varying degrees of frenzy, London more, the USA slightly less, are fighting against us through Ukraine, pumping it with the most modern weapons, announcing that they will produce new lethal and highly technological anti-missile systems specifically for Ukraine. Well, this is simply because this has never happened before. We started the special military operation in conditions where society was calm, comfortable, generally satisfied with its standard of living. And the fact that this also did not suit the West is a fact. They did not want society to be calm. They wanted to incite society against the authorities and prepared provocations. They cannot compete fairly. They are afraid of fair competition in everything, including hence the sanctions, in order to retain the positions that are irretrievably slipping away after 500 years of Western dominance. Therefore, once again, about our condition, the condition of our society, this is important to me as a citizen, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs carrying out the President's foreign policy, which should reflect the mood of the people. Of course, they want to create turmoil here. Putin recently mentioned this, that we are progressing daily, not as fast as we would like, but preserving people on the front line, while they try to make up for their failures on that very line of combat contact with terrorist acts, in order to undermine the way of life that people are used to. If these drone attacks are felt in Moscow and St. Petersburg, Then as for what is happening in the border areas, in the border regions of the Russian Federation, they simply experience all the hardships of martial law there. And I am very proud, frankly, that the people perceive this correctly. Perceive it as history dictated to us, and as those who defeated Nazism dictated to us. Moreover, right now we are fighting the direct followers and descendants of those Nazis in the same composition. Merz openly says we will again be in charge in Europe. If you are so frank, well, be ready.
You said that before offering the world an alternative world order, we must secure our national interests. And to do this, we must win. What are our national interests in the external arena?
For us to be an independent power, an independent civilization, for our borders to be reliably secured, so that no one even tries to think about advising us on how to organize our life inside Russia, and so that all the peoples of the Russian Federation continue to have their constitutionally guaranteed rights to education, to preserving their culture, traditions, and their religious beliefs. In such a capacity, Russia will not only be interested in cooperating as equals with other major centers that are forming. This includes China and India. So these major players, of course, will stand up for justice together with us, in the hope that the West, too, will eventually come to its senses. Europe in particular, and will be ready to honestly integrate on equal terms into these new systems of relations. For now, it is not ready for this. The United States is also absolutely not ready for this. And while this wait drags on, these new centers of power are forming their own network structures, BRICS being one of them, which draws together the leading economies of the global majority. And they resolve issues not the way it is done in NATO, where America commands and everyone tries obsequiously to somehow appease the hegemons. And this is certainly not the European Union, where the Brussels bureaucracy has usurped the rights of national governments. Neither in BRICS nor in the SCO, the Eurasian Economic Union, the CIS, or the CSTO, can anyone give a single example of Russia or China? If we talk about the SCO and BRICS or anyone else demanding something. No, it is always frank, mutually respectful negotiations aimed at a compromise.
35,000 sanctions is probably a historical record for the entire existence of humanity and the state. How do we manage to survive?
Thanks to what? Of course, thanks above all to our ancestors who created such a country, the richest country in the world, the largest country in the world, with access to seas and oceans, which allows us to develop trade and ensure our security with the involvement of the Navy. Undoubtedly to industrialization, which actually began back in the Russian Empire. This is spoken about a lot now. And the railways that connected the entire country were laid down then, and many foundations of ferrous metallurgy, and undoubtedly to industrialization already under the Soviet Union, when in the shortest possible time, in just a decade, 15 years before the start of the Great Patriotic War, colossal successes were achieved, and this in many ways also helped prevent a catastrophe. But still, our main national quality is what the West lacks. In our civilization, there is respect for those who created it, respect for those who built the cities, who defeated the enemies. We had times of Gorchakov after the Crimean War, when he said, "Russia is not angry. Russia is focusing when we suffered defeat for reasons there is no point in discussing now. But right now, we also need not to be angry. Being angry is the worst quality. It wastes nerves. We need to focus. But a healthy anger is quite appropriate. Not to be angry, but to acquire a healthy anger. Anger, including in terms of the need to accelerate everything in the direction of a technological breakthrough. A lot is being said about this now, and just angrily decide that we are obligated to do this. Get angry at ourselves. I want to achieve all this faster. And we need the same healthy anger on the external front, without falling into any hysterics, but simply having concluded internally that you should only verify, trust. We'll see about that later. First, verify, and most importantly, stick to your line. Just now, again, our Turkish neighbors are saying that they are ready to help again regarding Ukraine, but at the same time, they immediately signed NATO documents stating that the territorial integrity of the Kiev regime must be restored. There are other proposals. Our current American administration, again, says that we will just deal with Iran now, and then we will help you. We have the Army and Navy, and now for quite a while the Aerospace Forces and Unmanned Systems Forces, and we have the people. And therefore, when they say, well, let's solve things somewhere over there, well, let everything stay as it is, let's freeze on the line of contact, and then we'll think about how to find a compromise. We also have, firstly, a sense of historical continuity, our historical identity, and national pride, multinational pride. Therefore, when the West now tells us, well, we will think about when we, the West, decide to resume negotiations with you. But these will be negotiations where Europe will sit, America will sit, Zelensky, Putin. And before this, it is necessary to declare a truce, a ceasefire. After the ceasefire, we, Westerners, will bring in multinational forces led by France and England, and then, you know, we'll sit down to talk. What does this mean? It is an ultimatum. The Nazi regime will remain. We freeze on the line of contact. We won't recognize any territories where your referendums took place. But the quality of our people, it is still unique in that, remember? There was a song, the Soviets have their own pride. This is not because it appeared with the Soviets, but because Russians always had it. And here it is, this pride remains.
Sergey Viktorovich, may I ask, what were you like in the courtyard? You talked about healthy anger, and I think it's interesting. Did you hit or did you use diplomacy? We all know the familiar principle. If a fight is inevitable, hit first. We know whose principle that is, but what is yours?
I grew up, essentially, in a village, the city of Noginsk, formerly Bogorodsk. I am currently actively working with the Moscow region, with my friend Andrei Vorobyov, for the restoration of the name Bogorodsk. There are already some isolated toponymic changes there, but the city itself still remains Noginsk for now. And the part where I lived was a pure village. From the railway station to the left was the city, and to the right were ice wooden village houses with all the amenities as they are equipped in villages. And we boys, to hide a sin when the trains arrived, we would run to where the freight train was left, look to see what they brought in the freight cars, and if there were watermelons, we would act like hooligans.
Sergey Vladimirovich, the whole country knows a lot about you. But we've never asked about your grandparents, who they were, whose genes are in your blood, whose abilities, whose talents.
Mom and Dad divorced when I was just a few months old. They both graduated from the Institute of Foreign Trade, which is now part of MGIMO, which is why Mom lobbied for my attempt to enter MGIMO. After being assigned, they went to work in Brest at our customs, and then fate decreed that I started living only with my mom. I had a grandmother in Noginsk, she was a head nurse there, and my grandfather was the head of the Noginsk railway station. Throughout the war, he was responsible for dispatching trains to the front. Two of his brothers were at the front, both returned. Grandfather died early, quite young. He was 67 years old, and grandmother lived a little longer. She later moved to Moscow with us, and I loved them very much. They were true friends to me. They covered for me when they felt I had done something that Mom might not like. Well, as usually happens, roots play some kind of invisible role. Maybe you don't even think about it. I have so many generations. That's not the point. The point is that you are already living for them. It is the same as how we are now fighting for those who defeated the Germans, and all of Europe along with them.
You do rafting? Is that still true today?
Somewhere, probably since 1984 or 1985, our group of friends decided to go wild camping. And one of our friends, he was a year older in his studies, he is originally from Ufa, and he just invited us, along with another comrade of ours, to go to Ufa for a week for the summer, to go on the river, catch some fish. We went to the river, there are lakes there too, took a small boat, rowed around, caught fish on the Belaya River. It doesn't flow at all, it barely moves, smooth and calm. And we decided for the next year we gathered a team, 5 people, chose the Bia River, already in the Altai, a river that flows out of Lake Teletskoye. But before going there, we found out that several rivers flow into Lake Teletskoye, including the Shulishman River, which is very, very rough. We started working out the options and eventually agreed. We went up about 20 kilometers from this Lake Teletskoye along this very difficult river. It threw us into this lake. We all miraculously stayed in the rafts. We didn't flip over. Then we were towed on a boat across Lake Teletskoye, and then we rafted down the Bia River. And after that, we first got to the Khatun and traveled all over it from top to bottom. The beginning, the middle course, where the World Rafting Cup is held. There are rapids of class 4, 4.5 there. There are class 5 elements. And once we rafted from Mount Beluga itself. A very interesting route. You just have to spend the first 24 hours on the raft. Everything barely moves, and then it drops sharply downward. And on this section, there are 5 fantastically difficult rapids. Adrenaline is simply produced instantly. Did we flip? My raft didn't. We sailed on 2 rafts. Colleagues flipped a couple of times, but we pulled them out. And we spent almost 20 years on the Khatun.
Вытаскивали мы. И вот на Катуне мы провели почти 20 лет.
In the sense not winters, but summers. We have many friends there, and the region is fantastic.
Well, towards evening, you moor to the shore, take out the raft, light a fire, pitch a tent, and then guitar and a song. Guitar and a song, well, generally, guitar and a song. Roughly how many songs do you perform on the guitar? I know you probably haven't counted.
Well, I really love Vysotsky. I really love Okudjava.
Play and sing?
Yes.
Someday we'll hear it. Sergey Viktorovich.
Well, absolutely must. Well, I will take advantage of your opportunities in our media space without any fees. If it is interesting to anyone, I accept your proposals.
It is interesting. We really want to hear it. Sergey Viktorovich, we are interested in everything because journalists, you know, people like not only to peek at you, but also to eavesdrop, especially when you think the microphone is off. Remember, if you had registered the trademark morons for yourself with just one word, you would probably have become a rich man because practically all my colleagues and I wore this t-shirt. It was sold in editions of thousands and thousands of copies. Is this your character, or does it just slip out depending on a situation? It slips out. But we are all living people.
What liars! I will remind them of this. This is, of course, a hypocritical statement. No, when something suddenly doesn't just upset you, but unexpectedly and incorrectly someone does something, a hot word happens. As for the trademark, I never thought about it. By the way, after Alaska, where I appeared in a USSR sweater, people called my assistants, thanked them, said they were ready to knit these sweaters for my friends. You understand, when this attracts people, many have appeared now. They never disappeared, but now there is some special wave. The USSR is all about where we started. The people don't just want a good, well-fed life. It is this feeling of belonging to what your ancestors did in the most difficult conditions. Raised this country, pulled it out of poverty, created the conditions for hundreds of languages to coexist. When people put on these sweaters, they feel that even those who did not live in the USSR, their parents and grandparents told them about it. Therefore, it seems to me, as Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin said, he who does not regret the USSR has no heart, and he who wants to bring it back has no head. So regarding the heart, all this is preserved. And as for the head, thank God, in the current situation, Russia has a head, and it is sober.
You already mentioned that our country, the motherland, is kissed by God, protected by God, but are you yourself a believer? Believer.
My grandmother baptized me secretly from my mom. Mom was a communist, and she herself went to get baptized already at a very mature age, after our situation with the collapse of the Soviet Union happened. And my grandmother carried me in Noginsk. There is a temple standing on the banks of the Moscow River to this day. God grant that it continues to operate there. Secretly, I still have that cross that was tied on me then.
Тайно, у меня крестик тот сохранился, который мне тогда повязали. Хорошее было время.
Those were good times. And did anything ever happen in your life that could be explained by nothing other than a miracle, other than God?
It probably did. I wouldn't want to recall some stories, but there were times when, somehow rafting down the Katun, we made a stop, took horses, rode into the mountains, and I had done equestrian sports back in the institute. I had some skills, but not all the guys did. And suddenly the horses bolted when we were already heading down. A mountain on the right, a really decent abyss on the left. And one of my comrades was carried away, and he could have practically knocked me down. By some miracle, we managed to stop. But if we take political dramas, that is probably still the putsch. I again return to what we started with. Back then, they thought that Russia was herbivorous, that it was obedient, but that it was necessary for it to follow everything we would designate. When it became clear that Russia is not obedient, that Russia has its own pride, well, this began to manifest itself even before the Munich speech of 2007, which you recalled when Vladimir Vladimirovich laid everything out extremely frankly, honestly, in the context of a discussion that was entirely permeated with hypocrisy, by and large. There were moments before that too. But we did not lose hope that the West would come to its senses, that all this was just temporary relapses that it should suppress within itself. Take the Baltics, for example. When in 2004 I had just taken up the ministerial post, and they started pulling the Baltics into the next wave of NATO expansion, the president asked them, "Why are you doing this? We had an agreement." You understand, from their period of being part of the Soviet Union, they are left with this feeling that they were occupied, subjugated, and they still have this fear. And we will take them into NATO and the European Union, and they will calm down. Well, so what did they calm down? They are now the main loudmouths who are being set on us, knowing their hot-headed nature of Estonian guys. Lithuania and Latvia have now announced that they are lifting the ban on deploying nuclear weapons on their territory. So we can only rely on ourselves, as the president has repeatedly emphasized. And, well, if this is a burden, then yes, there are severe consequences to what is happening, especially in the Baltics. But I want to say again, we are completing the work of our grandfathers and great-grandfathers who destroyed Nazism. But our former allies saved this Nazism. The fate of the Wehrmacht generals who found shelter, home, and refuge in the West is well known. And now what I could never have thought would happen is happening. Nazism is reviving openly. No one even hides it anymore. Therefore, we have no other option if we want to remain our Russian civilization.
Final question. Sergey Viktorovich, what do you put into the word motherland, Russia, life?
Слово родина, Россия, жизнь.
The most important thing. Russia is life, and life is Russia.
Россия — это жизнь, а жизнь — это Россия.